Hey, this is Candia Raquel, and you are at the Sensual Sessions Podcast, the place to explore sensing pleasure through your senses and moving in a way that is free from inhibition and full of self expression. To get these episodes delivered free every week on your inbox, go to my website and subscribe. It's my name, candiaraquel.com, www.candiaraquel. And today we have a very special guest. She is a pelvic floor goddess, Elyse Sparkles. She will tell us her proper spelling of her name, and she's a personal trainer and a core and pelvic floor movement rehab specialist. So welcome, Elise. I am very, very happy and honored to have you here at the Sensual Sessions podcast.
Thank you, Kanya. I'm so excited to be here and to talk with you.
I am stunned. I am like a little bit surprised that someone with your background and especially exists. So I'm gonna ask everything, starting with when did you discover that you had a pelvic floor? Like, yeah, it might sound like, yeah, when I was a little and people, when did you become like, oh my God, like there's a full functional structure down there in the crotch that it's not only for being, going to the bathroom, having sex, but it's like the pelvic floor. Can you recall that moment?
This is such a good question because I have been connected to my body, been moving, been a dancer for my whole life since I think I started dancing when I was 3. And so I think the word floated around through different anatomy classes I had in college, and then becoming a personal trainer, getting certified in yoga. The word floated around and the idea floated around, especially the idea and the word Kegels, because I think that just we're aware maybe of that idea through just magazine articles or things in that we come across, especially as a movement professional, but also just as anyone. So the awareness of it was there, but I would say I didn't connect with my my own personal pelvic floor really deeply around when I was pregnant, but then in a very substantial way after I gave birth. Um, and it was when I started experiencing some things going wrong. I'm saying that in air quotes for the people listening, that it's not really wrong, but it felt uncomfortable, painful. My function was not functioning well. So when that started happening, I went into a deeper dive into actually taking those anatomical terms and embodying them and implying them to my own body. And that is when I feel like I really was aware of what my pelvic floor was doing in real time, in space, in my body. Um, Specifically, a moment when I actually went, I think I was about 13 weeks postpartum, and I was having things like stress incontinence, tailbone pain. And I went to my doctor for help, and she just took out a pad of post-it notes and wrote the word Kegels on it and slid it across the desk to me and said, Google it. And at that time, I already had a lot of my movement background. So I knew that I could Kegel, which is generally thought about as the contraction and release of the pelvic floor. I knew that I could Kegel all day. Like that wasn't the thing. I knew it wasn't the thing, but I didn't know what was the thing about the pelvic floor that was going to help my symptoms. and help it really function well. So that's when I went on my deep dive, got more certifications, and now understand it in a different way. So I would say it was that time, really.
Yeah, when something went off.
Yes. And I'll add to that, what I also learned in that time was that I was actually experiencing myself pelvic floor dysfunction long before anything having to do with being pregnant or giving birth. And one thing that I notice is that oftentimes this information and this specific awareness of the pelvic floor area of our bodies is reserved for that population, is reserved for the prenatal or the postnatal, postpartum population, which of course it's very necessary and very important for those people. What I really like to do now is try to open up the awareness and bring it to all people, because everyone who has a pelvis has this part of their bodies in female anatomy and male anatomy. It's very, very similar. So we're talking about everyone really needs to know about this part of their body and how it influences their life and their daily functions.
Yeah. And speaking of which, maybe some of the sensualists here listening have also heard the word pelvic floor floating around, maybe had an image, but maybe not. Maybe this is the first time they are listening at that word. So, what's the pelvic floor? What would you tell your 75-year-old auntie at a Christmas dinner that that is a pelvic floor?
Yes. Um, at the dinner, that would be more tricky because I like to get like really into the body, but I'm going to do my best. Um, so the pelvic floor is the area of your body that's on the base of your pelvis. So, um, if we're not at the dinner party, if we're or maybe if we are at the dinner party, if anybody wants to and feels comfortable, they can take their own hands and find your pubic bone. So if you take your hands in the front of your pelvis and go down a little bit, so this is really the bony structure that's under where your pubic hair is. So if you press down a little bit, you'll find your pubic bone there. Then we're finding right now finding four bony landmarks. So we're finding our pubic bone in the front of the pelvis.
In the
Then
front
we're going to
of the
take
pelvis, but like you said, a little down. Like,
yes. Yes, I actually have a model here, and I know if people are listening, they can't see this, but perhaps if
yeah,
it's a the
I,
video on YouTube.
and now you're gonna have two models because I have been in classes and I tell them to touch their pubic bone, and the far that they dare to go is their navel. Like, okay,
Navel, yes.
on here, maybe here is a because I am starting to get like shy and ashamed. So that's the question, like, how down should we touch?
Yes, you're going to. That's why I say pubic hair, even though sometimes me saying that is uncomfortable for
Pubic
people.
hair is
But
around
that,
here, so
yes, and then go,
or
yes,
even
you can go
lower.
even lower. Yes, you're going to go even lower. So you can go even lower. And underneath your fingers, you will start to feel this bony structure. If you start to go low enough, the low belly sort of allows your fingers to dip in. But then once you get low enough, if you press down, you will feel this bony area. And we can get really specific here. We say pubic bone, but it's actually, there's a little joint here and there's actually two sides. You might even be able to feel that
Yeah.
with your fingers. So you're really going to get, yes. And so if you go down enough, go ahead all the way down. And can you press in and kind of feel that bony structure?
Yeah, and then it goes to the sides, and we start to get close to the genitals. But that's the point. Like, it's easier to touch the ribs because there is bone all over the place. But finding the pubic bone in the belly, it's like, okay, everything is fat around here. Well, with a little muscle, but Wow, the pubic bone is really down there.
It is. It's pretty deep down there. Yes. And I think it will also help when we find the other bony structure, because then it gives us an idea of sort of this diamond that we're tracing. We're tracing this diamond that if you're in a chair, that you're literally sitting on. So let's now find the other points. If, let's say, you are on your chair, there's ways to find this standing too, but I think the easiest way is sitting. And if you take your left hand and just put it under your left butt cheek and then sit down. Oh, my chair almost fell over. And then sit back down. And maybe you need to, because there is flesh here, of course. So you might need to move around a little bit or move your fingers around a little bit. But if you lean to that left side, you'll probably start to feel the bony structure there that you're sitting on.
Yeah.
The sits bone on one side. And then, of course, you can do that to the other side, right hand under the right butt cheek and sit down on it, or kind of maybe lean to that direction a little bit to feel it kind of start to poke in down into your hand. So now we had the front of the diamond with the pubic bone. We're getting the sides of the diamond with the left and right sits bone. And this is another maybe slightly awkward one, but to find the tailbone, I actually just like to take my hands to my backside. If the same thing might happen, people might be pretty high up. And if you're high up, you might be on this flat triangle shape bone of the sacrum, and you have to trace that down. And it does, we're just getting right into it here. You do have to take your fingers a little bit into your butt crack to find it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you're taking your fingers and you're going to trace down, and you might be able to actually feel the bony structure there.
Yeah, like down the butt crack.
Down the butt crack. We're getting right into it. Yes. So we've located those four bony structures. And what we're talking about in the pelvic floor is the musculature. There's layers of musculature and fascia that connect between those four bony landmarks that we found. So in my model, you can kind of see the red areas. And if you're just listening, you can just imagine almost like those 4 points that we just found are connected with muscle and connective tissue. And even though it's called floor, that name is slightly misleading because the floor we think of as
Flat.
flat. Yes, but if you can imagine actually that the musculature connecting those four bony parts is more like a hammock or a sling, because what we know about the pelvis is that it's kind of shaped like a bowl or a basin. We talk about it in anatomical terms sometimes. And so the bottom of that bowl is not flat like a floor. It's actually more a rounded actual bowl shape.
And maybe
So
it
I
could
think
be also like a nest.
like a nest.
Like
Oh,
it
yes.
never occurred to me, but nests have the eggs. I am watching on Facebook the live development of many nests of eaglets, and it's so
Yes,
uh, and it's like, yeah. And what do you have in the pelvic floor? Well, if you're a woman when you're pregnant, your baby is like, well, a little bit above, but it comes out from the pelvic floor.
I love that analogy. I've never thought about it that way, but I
Either.
love it because immediately I started to put the eggs in my hand, which are these organs that fit right in here. So in my hand, I have this rectum that
Wow,
I'll put in.
the
Well,
rectum,
they're all falling apart now, but the bladder,
the
which also,
bladder.
and then we have what you were talking about, the uterus, fallopian tubes, and vaginal canal in here. And I love to show people this too, or just think about it, because you've got quite a bit
Yeah,
in this space.
yeah.
And the pelvic floor's function is to help support all of these organs with their positioning here, but also with their function. Um, And so I think it's very helpful for people to start to visualize those images of where this is in the body and what it's doing. And one more thing I'll say about that is that kind of hard to see in the model, and it might be kind of um, tricky to visualize as well. But you know, let me say it like this. Sometimes when we're studying anatomy, like in anatomy books, you have a drawing of a bicep, and it's like the origin is here, the attachment is here, this is it.
Yeah,
But what we know exactly, but what we know about studying fascia models and just as movement practitioners, we know that it's all connected. So it doesn't just, it's not just right here and stops here. This is connected to your inner thighs. This is connected to your core. This is connected to your postural muscles. This is connected to your glutes. Everything around here is interacting and connected to this area. So it's not just an isolated spot. So a lot of people who have kind of unexplained back pain or hip pain, sometimes the missing piece is addressing this, even though they've been focused on the other areas. So I think it's helpful to think about it kind of interacting with the whole body system as well.
yeah, and I love to see the anatomical model. If for the sensualists here listening us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, well, like you can Google and see the image of a pelvic floor. But it's very useful to do the practice to explore the four bony landmarks that Elise guided us through. Like first, your pubic bone right in front, just a really down there, just above the genitals, and then the two sits bones, placing your hands beneath the buttocks, and then the coccyx. And the what brings these four bony landmarks is the pelvic floor, though it's not a real flat floor, but like like a hammock shape. And it's beautiful to have like this image of the pelvic floor being a hammock because it's easier to understand that it's a, con- a dynamic container because like there are things in the pelvic floor stored, especially B. So, and it's like quite challenging for for that structure to go from being like shut down and closed to then open and allow things to go out when you go to the bathroom or during childbirth. So I am curious to ask you about what is the biggest challenge that you notice your students and clients have in regards to the pelvic floor?
For symptoms for what they're experiencing, you mean?
Yeah,
I work with a lot of people actually for constipation. Um, we know, I think also in the general idea of things and what people notice is like drinking water and having fiber and those types of things, which are of course very important, but also the pelvic floor can have a big component in what you just said in like the opening and release and allowing that. So that's a big thing that I see. Stress incontinence is one also, and that is well, peeing a little bit or having that sense of urine coming out with a type of impact like laughing, sneezing, running, jumping, or lifting something very heavy. That's a common one. Also, pain with intercourse. And that is one that I didn't realize was as um, as many people experiencing it until I started working with people, and I experienced it as well. But then I saw how many other people are really experiencing that as well. So there's in each of those symptoms that I just mentioned, there's a multitude of approaches and many different things that could be happening with each of those. So it's important, I think, to get a wide variety of practitioners and medical team and help with all of those. And a thing that is consistent with all of those is getting the pelvic floor to be coordinating really well and functioning really well. And that includes the ability to contract and the ability to release, um, to be coordinated with your breath cycle, and also have optimal positioning in your body, just like we would look at alignment for other areas of the body.
Yeah, there can be a lot of things going on in the pelvic floor, whether you're aware or not. Because, well, the pelvic floor is there trying to do its thing at its best. And I think the first time I like had like a okay, there's something down there and it functions in a certain way was when I was with a boyfriend uh, on intimacy and having intercourse, and he told me, "You're pushing me out." And I was like, "What? What am I doing?" And later, yeah, like I was unconsciously pushing him out because like he was not such a great performer there in that area, and it was like without any problem. Like we were like a nice couple, but sex was whatever. And I think I wasn't the best back then. I was really young, maybe 22. And yeah, like there are many things that you can do with the pelvic floor besides going to the bathroom. And well, that was the first time, like, okay, like I can do something like pushing out with the pelvic floor, but I can do something else like drawing in. And and I forgot about it. And then I got curious about the word pelvic floor. When I heard about it, taking my first Pilates training as a teacher, and to my surprise, the pelvic floor was missing from anatomy books. And I even have one edition of the Biel's anatomy book that completely omits the pelvic floor. There's no even like the term mentioned. And I have a more recent edition that includes the pelvic floor and 5 pages and etc. But I had to go to the university and sneak my way into the library of the gynecobstetrics faculty to find out that, wow, there's a world down there. But
Yeah.
really, a lot of none of the anatomy books that I had in my hands even mentioned the pelvic floor, nor anything in that area, as if it didn't exist. And I mean, the pelvic floor is like a significant area, like a whole baby fits through through that area in our body. And definitely there's a lot of like taboo around the pelvic floor, which makes no sense because like what does taboo has to do with science? Absolutely nothing, but it infiltrated that area
Yeah.
of the body, and especially in regards to feminine anatomy. I think the only place in the world that includes, for example, the clitoris in textbooks, like in scholar textbooks, is in Germany and since 2 years ago or something, which is, I would say, outrageous. Like, just imagine if anatomy books didn't include the face, like as if eyes, nose, and mouth didn't exist. And the truth is
Yeah.
that we use the face as much or maybe even less than the pelvic floor because like
Yeah.
we can be with the eyes closed and not using the nose to like these are sensitive devices, but the pelvic floor as well. So then like I became really curious, and then I found the books from Blandine Calais Germain, a French author that made wonderful studies on, especially on feminine pelvic floor and childbirth. And then it's fascinating to understand a little bit about this area and be able to actually witness how the pelvic floor is connected with everything. And I mean witness in an embodied way. Like once you get to feel the pelvic floor, you notice like, oh wow, it's connected with the inner thighs. And if I am tensing the butt and the pelvic floor, my whole posture changes. Like I can get like tensed in the back. And something that I find like also very interesting is that it's a set of muscles that are quite different than the rest of the muscles, meaning like the biceps is like very easy to sense and connect and see. So would you share with us a little bit about how the pelvic floor is different than the six pack, and what kind of like can you do like a bunch of reps for the pelvic floor, and would that be as effective as doing, I don't know, lifting weights or whatever?
Well, you just brought up actually so many different good points on that subject. So I'll just pick out a couple of those that you said. Starting from that last one, I think um, sometimes a common thing is for Kegels to be prescribed to people. And I think what happens when we sometimes like on social media and stuff, there'll be like Kegel to this beat of music and do 100 reps a day or something like that. um but actually it's very common. Well, first I want to say that I think in the general population, people are just focusing on the contraction, just contract, 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 and not having so much focus on the release. And I'll talk about that more in a second. But first, I wanted to say that it's very common actually for people to think that they need to get stronger and need to strengthen the muscles. But a lot of people are actually chronically in a hypertonic state, are chronically contracted. And that does go back to the bicep, because if the bicep was contracted all the time, and sometimes actually you might see people with this posture who lift a lot of weights and kind of have their arms like this. Yeah. So this, if you imagine, if you like make a muscle in your arm and feel that bicep contract. Now, if you, I had a pelvic floor physical therapist use this image with me one time, and I loved it. If you imagine this contracted bicep muscle like a dinosaur T-Rex arm, and then say, "Okay, I'm going to throw a ball at you. Now catch the ball." It would be very hard for that T-Rex arm to catch the ball without being able to fully extend and then contract again. So what often so that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying a lot of people, without even realizing it, are in this chronically contracted state. And so what I like to say is that when we're talking about pelvic floor strength, I encourage people to think about the word strength not like contraction, but strength like coordinated. We want more of this area of musculature to be coordinated, um, and be able to do all the actions it needs to do rather than just being quote unquote very strong and contracted. And then that brings me to the second thing that you mentioned when you said the bicep. I think an area that gets very overlooked is the eccentric phase of motion. Again, we're getting a little like nerdy on the language here, But basically, if you imagine doing a bicep curl, you pick up a weight and then you bring it up to your shoulder. That's the concentric phase of the action. And then putting it back down, lengthening your arm to put it back down is the eccentric length of the action. And we need the pelvic floor to be able to do that phase of action equally well. And another way I like to describe that um, is imagine that you've just gone to the grocery store and you have bags of tomato sauce jars in your hands, and you have to bring them from your car into your house. And so you're holding the bags up with bent elbows, heavy bags. And if you didn't have that eccentric phase of motion, or that ability to let let it release gently, then they would just fall out of your hands and the tomato sauce all over the floor. So we need to be able to both pick up that bag with tomato sauce, jar of tomato sauce, and also gently put it back down. And when the pelvic floor can do that, then when you go to, it can kind of just be like in a resting state. And then when you have a sneeze or something like that, it can just, rather than being here or being like all the way lax and out here and not being able to find that contraction at all. So it's like we want to be able to have it go through its full range of motion, just like that is similar to other muscle groups. But I think with other muscle groups, it's a little bit more just easy to see in a hinge joint or something like that. It's easier to feel and easier to visualize. And I think I had a third point, but I can't remember it at the moment.
Yeah. Let's let it simmer. It will come forth in a minute. So about Kegels, I have so many research about Kegels because like there are I think there's like a very toxic Kegel culture around the pelvic floor that talks about like achieving strength and deserving as like things to aim for. Like the more I can contract the pelvic floor, the the sexier I will be, and I don't know, the more loyal my husband will be to me, or my, I don't know, my three lovers or whatever setup you're into. Like, yeah, like I am very worthy because I have a pelvic floor that can lift a lot of weight. And there are also like people that take this very seriously, like pelvic floor weight lifting. And you can see the pictures, like they are not showing you their crotch like that in Instagram. But you see them squatting with a little string hanging from the pelvic floor, being a he or a she. And and what's hanging from the little thread is like a pineapple or a weight or a kettlebell or something that I think it's like, yeah, but that's not the place I think for competition and showing off, because they will end up constipated. And because it's like, okay, like meet your quarterly goals when you're at your job, but the pelvic
Yeah.
floor the pelvic floor is such an intimate multifunctional area of our body that it's important not only for proper what's how do you say gut movements. Yeah,
Uh, oh, like the digestive tract or the motility peristalsis.
yeah, it's important for your digestive health, for your intestines, so you can poo and go to the bathroom whenever you need, so you don't leak every time you sneeze or laugh or anything. It's important for childbirth, it's important for sex, intimacy, but even more, the pelvic floor is important for breathing and posture, like you mentioned right in the beginning. Like okay, this is a structure that supports the physiology of breathing. And by aiming for this idea of strong, aka short, hypertonic, tight pelvic floor, you're not only not getting sexier, but you're disrupting the most important function of living, that is breathing. And I feel it can be challenging because as a woman, it's like, oh no, like there's something wrong with me because I am pushing my boyfriend out, or I am leaking when I sneeze, or my fucking boyfriend tells me that I am not tight and he doesn't feel anything, when actually the insides of the vaginal canal and etc. have very variable tones. So it has a lot to do with functional stuff in our body that is like fundamental, and also very tender areas of our personality and identity that are like intertwined with how we feel about intimacy. So yeah, what do you think about this? Like this
I
approach of
think,
Kegels and like,
yes, that is definitely the approach I come from too. Actually, when you were talking about the weightlifting and the Kegels and all that, I was thinking that I think one of the hardest transitions is for someone who's coming from that mentality to then go into a more breathwork focused practice, because it feels like doing less. It feels like not doing that much. But actually, in my opinion, it's doing more because it is exactly what you talked about. It's connecting to the nervous system, it's connecting to the whole core canister. Also, when we talk about that word core, a lot of times the bottom of the core, the pelvic floor, gets left out of that conversation too. So it's part of that whole canister, that whole center of your body. Um, and I think that it's much more functional to approach it in that way. I will say that I think I have found that feeling a contraction and feeling a release is very important for people who might be starting from a place of not having that much connection to their body so that they can sense it. So sometimes I use that really just for awareness purposes only. And then we go into all of the other stuff. And also, along with the breath work, I was looking for my other model because it's more flexible.
hey,
But another thing too is that we've said this quite a few times, I think, but it's not just a static place. It's like other parts in your body that move and are affected by everything. So another kind of hidden place that's not talked about very much is pelvic mobility, and noticing um, range of motion, the ways that your pelvis can move, even just by doing some rotation, some tilt, some anterior tilt and tuck, just moving the pelvis around. This can take the pelvic floor for a little bit of a ride. And sometimes, if we are, I come up from a perspective of posture that there's not just one perfect place for your body to be. I don't view it like that. I view it like as we're a dynamic being, of course. But let's just say that somebody is very habitually in a very tucked or very posteriorly tucked position, maybe sitting at the desk a lot, maybe driving a lot. Then this can get some areas of the pelvic floor shortened and just by finding more balance and I mean balance by being able to go through ranges of motion, that way we can help the musculature perform more optimally, because then it can go through the ranges of motion. So even that goes along with the breath work. Sometimes this seems a little bit more simple than cranking out a lot of like hip bridges with a lot of weights, or the Kegel, like many reps of Kegels and stuff like that, it maybe doesn't feel as much like doing. It's a little bit a step down, but I feel that it can be sometimes more effective in actually getting your function um, working really well. Um,
Yeah, and definitely it may feel like doing less because like you're not cranking weight, you're not sweating, you're not like, I don't know, grimacing and like you're not having a bad time. But let's be realistic. Like you make, if you work out at the gym like with a lot of weight or medium weight, when in your everyday life are you gonna use that skill? It's practically useless unless you are a bricklayer and then okay, or a marine, or someone that operates a huge crane in construction. Well, then that's gonna be a useful skill and not just like a vanity skill. And it's even that it's okay. Like if you want to be all bulky with muscle mass because that's the way you like to look, it's perfect. And even though you don't use it, it's like having a Ferrari just to have it parked in your garage without running it. It's okay, it's respectable, and it makes no harm. But that's, I believe that there's a huge difference in regards to the pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor never gets to exert at a level of demand that 1000 kegels with weights requires. Like, and what is actually required from the pelvic floor is that it dynamically works on every breath you take along your everyday life. And those are about 22,000 breaths that we take. So for 22,000 times a day, your pelvic floor is going to do something. And that something has to be very precise and subtle and nuanced because you do it unconsciously. And if you train the wrong way, you are hijacking and messing with the kind of work that the pelvic floor has to do. So then it makes sense to train the pelvic floor through pelvic mobility, meaning, okay, you train the pelvic floor moving in in concert with your posture and your everyday movements, because then you ensure that your pelvic floor is functional during those kind of movements. When you will stumble and the pelvic floor will help you regain balance, and when you're sitting and you sneeze, you want the pelvic floor to eccentrically contain the pee from leaking. And breath work, I feel it's even more important because then you're getting acquainted with the pelvic floor working the way it should habitually work. So,
yeah.
yeah, would you like to? Yeah, tell us.
Well, what you were saying brings me to touch on the diaphragm a little bit. So I think about it kind of like this, where the diaphragm kind of is, up inside the rib cage and then the pelvic floor down at the base of your pelvis. And they work together. And as the diaphragm pulls down, the pelvic floor draws down a little bit. And as the diaphragm comes back up, the pelvic floor works up. So all that breathing that you were talking about, all the breath work, is like we want that to be coordinated reflexively
Yeah.
without having to think about it. And of course, there's all different types of manipulations you can do as exercises, just like we can do all kinds of exercises. But reflexively, we want those actions to work together. And I think that's another kind of missing piece sometimes is upper body mobility and thoracic mobility because we want to give the space for the diaphragm to be able to move really well. So then it can be coordinated. So the pelvic floor can coordinate with that. It's like a chain reaction kind of thing where we want this to be able to move really well. So then the pelvic floor has space. And sometimes what happens when this is contracted, I kind of think about it like a tube of toothpaste. Sometimes if it's very contracted up on the top and you squeeze it, then it goes down and it bears down into the pelvic floor. So we're also looking up here. It's just there's so many reasons why it's really um a full body experience when we are addressing the pelvic floor. For many, we could talk for hours and hours about all the different connections, but this is a really important one and one that I think gets missed. Is sometimes it seems like, well, why are we talking about up here when we really are, talking about the pelvic floor? Well, because it's very connected. It's connected to the breath cycle.
Yeah, it the pelvic floor is all encompassing. And the reason why I hate Kegels and I really believe that Kegels suck is because they are so differentiated and isolating of just one function of the pelvic floor, that is contraction in situ, completely disregarding their systemic context within the kernel, within the container of the core, and therefore disrupting and even worsening the functionality of the pelvic floor as a system. So it's like, okay, you want to lift a lot of weight with your pelvic floor, but at the cost of living 20 years less, maybe because you affected your breathing patterns and the oxygenation of your brain. Like, really think about it. And people don't even like dare to really see that the aftermath can be disastrous. And I know this firsthand because I have had students that have been prescribed to do Kegels from their gynecologist or their urologist or proctologist, like, yeah, like the way that you have been prescribed them, like with a even a context of shame, like, yeah, Kegels, and you find about it. And the thing is that there are a lot of great health specialists and doctors, but there are also a lot of people that don't see the totality of how much not only the core but the whole self is involved in the pelvic floor. Like
Yeah.
even psycho-emotional factors. Like I have also had people like having terrible meltdowns because they had like suddenly the memory of the first time they felt shame when they were 3 years old because they pee on their pants and their parent humiliate them. And that is connected with patterns of tension in the pelvic floor. So that's why I love your approach towards the pelvic floor because first off is really informed, anatomically informed. Like, okay, it doesn't the pelvic floor doesn't work in isolation, and it's important to address it within the functional context of how do you want the pelvic floor to perform on a daily basis? Well, you want it to help you to breathe and to go to the bathroom and to have a fulfilling intimacy with your beloved. And yeah, yeah. Would you share with us a little exercise or a little something to
Yes.
connect with our pelvic floor?
Yes. Um, I had something in mind, and through our conversation, another thing popped up. So, if I can share two different things,
If,
because I think this is a very quick change that people can make a big difference. And that is simply if you notice when you're standing, usually maybe when you're at the counter cooking or brushing your teeth or on the phone, I want you to just increase your awareness of how you're standing when you're doing those things. And I'll give it visual for watching and try to describe it really well for people who are listening. But very, very often, what happens is as we're, if imagine we're cooking, a lot of people lean their pelvis against the counter. So their pelvis is in front of their feet here. And so if you notice that, one simple change that you can do is just move your whole entire pelvis back in space so that if you were to see a plumb line from the center of your hip down, it would be right over your ankles rather than shifted forward in space. That's one simple thing that people can notice throughout their day and try and shift that to just bring everything into a little bit more of an optimal position for the pelvic floor function.
love it, because that's one of my terribly bad habits. Like I have just saw myself at the sink washing the dishes, and it's like, yeah, that's me. Of course, that's me. And the problem is that if I wash the dishes half an hour every day, it's like 3.5 hours every week, which make for 12 hours a month, meaning half a day, spending half a day consistently with a pelvic floor, with a posture that is detrimental for the pelvic floor. Well, no wonder 20 years down the road, there's a bladder control issue and back pain and bad breathing and everything associated.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one of those things that's a very small and simple shift that can have a big impact. So that's a great one to look out for.
Love it. I love it. Definitely.
And then if we have time, I thought we would do a breathing exercise since we've
Yeah,
talked so much about that.
sure.
So from where you're sitting in an upright position, then take your own hands around your ribs. This is slightly awkward, actually, maybe for some people brings the shoulders up, but see if you can do this in a relatively comfortable way where your hands are kind of around your rib cage. And we're going to focus on our inhale right now. And as we inhale, I want you to see if you can get your rib cage to widen out into your hands. So it's almost like an accordion right here at your ribs. And as you inhale, that accordion is getting wider, left to right. Now, really, this is happening 360 degrees, but I like to think about these sides because I think it gets us out of the front, the real chest lift, which is not bad, but this is just a different thing that we're focusing on right now. So the rib cage is really expanding all the way around as you inhale. So take one more breath like that, feeling the expansion as you inhale. And then let your hands come down. You can kind of wiggle that out a little bit to release that. We're going to put that inhale focus to the side for a moment. And now we're going to focus on our exhale.
Okay.
So take your hands to your low belly, just let them rest here. And this is a candle breath idea I got from my one of my certifications, Restore Your Core. And you're going to imagine now that you have a big sheet cake in front of your face with 100 candles on it. And you're going to take a slow, steady exhale out through your mouth and sequentially blow out all 100 candles. So let's just go for that as you're ready. You're going to exhale out through your mouth, like you're actually blowing out the candles. You can feel the air coming out through your mouth. And there's 100 candles. So you're really going to have to get to the end of that exhale and maybe even extend it a little bit because you've got a lot to go. And when you're ready to inhale, just go ahead, sip in and inhale, and then go again. Blow out all those 100 candles. So you can keep this in a round, just keep doing it as I'm talking. And as you're doing it, I want you to notice what's happening underneath your hands. Can you feel this low belly area gently, steadily draw in towards the spine? Yes, exactly. So take one more round like this. Now, some people feel the opposite action, and that's okay. Sometimes it's just like that. But for this experience, see if you can feel that gentle draw in towards the spine with the low belly area as you exhale. And then you can let that go. I always like to wiggle it out to kind of come to a clean slate. And we're going to see if we can put those two together, what we just did. So you can have your hands wherever they serve you. I like to have one hand around the ribs and then the other hand at the low belly so I can feel what's going on in both areas. But whatever feels good to you is okay. You're going to inhale now and find that big rib cage expansion. And I want you to see if you can keep the ribs wide as you take the candle breath exhale. They'll have to draw in eventually because they're going to, but we're just seeing if we can keep them wide. And this is a little bit of a rub your belly, pat your head for some people. So be gentle with yourself. Just rewind a little bit if you want a little bit more practice with it. You're going to inhale, feel the wide expansiveness through your rib cage as you inhale. And you're going to try to keep your ribs out into your hands as you take that candle breath exhale and feel the low belly area draw into your spine. So we're doing a few things here. We're trying to kind of get out of that pattern that we mentioned before about maybe the obliques kicking in a lot or feeling very static in throughout the rib cage and the thoracic area and then pushing down to the pelvic floor. We're trying to keep that expanded and wide as we get the reflexive action on the exhale of that abdominal engagement, which brings the pelvic floor along for the ride. So we didn't even have to really say anything about the pelvic floor, although we want to do that eventually, but just for our quick practice now, we didn't even really have to cue it in any way, like saying, now do this with your pelvic floor, now do that with your pelvic floor. But just by practicing this exercise, we're getting it to respond reflexively and join in with the action, which is really ideal. So that would be those, well, really, it's kind of three things, but those three things would be practices that I would recommend to experiment with maybe throughout the week. And then maybe your listeners can get back to you and let you know how they experienced it in their body. The standing with the hips over the heels, a three-dimensional inhale, really feeling that movement in the rib cage. And then the candle breath exhale. And if you want to, you can put those last two together. You can also practice them separately for now.
Really love this one of bringing together the inhalation and the exhalation because, yeah, you never mentioned the pelvic floor, and I didn't even really pay attention to the pelvic floor, just to the low belly and the rib cage. And then, like, now my pelvic floor is like, yeah, I am here, all sensitive, and I feel the pelvic floor expanding on the exhale, inhale, and contracting on the exhale. And I also feel my posture really flush and upright, but effortless. And I love how elegant the pelvic floor is. It's not a tacky muscle that needs a lot of repetitions and like, "Ugh!" No, the
Yeah.
pelvic floor is elegant. Like you just like plug it in, like connect the nervous system to the pelvic floor, like in this case via the core, and then it just starts doing its work. without you even worrying. And I love how you brought all our anatomical tour into this experience of the pelvic floor, because when it comes to the pelvic floor, the same with pleasure, less is more. Like when things get complicated, pleasure diminishes. And when things get also like disconnected from posture and breathing and the basic alignment of the center of the body, it's very hard to keep the engagement of the core. So this been like a great taste. Tell us, how can we learn more about your work and learn with you?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for this. It was such a wonderful conversation. So wonderful, so great to have it with your listeners. And yeah, so everything is under my name. You can go to ElyseSparks.com, spelled a little funny. So it's ELYSESPARKES. And there you'll find my website. You can also find me on Instagram there. And I do have some downloads, some free downloads that people can get on my website for just a little bit more of this information on these common things that we hear about the pelvic floor, and then what we really want to be thinking about maybe instead of those. So they can find that there.
Thank you so much, Elise. It's been great having you at the podcast.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you also, Sensualists, for being here and connecting with your pelvic floor the right way. And go follow Elise Sparks at her Instagram and her website, and make sure to get her free materials for you to take the connection of your pelvic floor to the next level. And if you haven't already, also go grab the free guide to awaken sensuality at my website, which is my name, candiaraquel.com, www.candiaraquel.com. Until next time, remember to take the time to sense your fire so you can share the flame.